Hello and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest. May 22nd, 2025, the big and beautiful or huge and hideous edition. I'm David Plotz of CityCast in Washington, D.C. From Yale University Law School, the New York Times Magazine, Emily Bazelon, and New Haven, Connecticut also. Hey, Emily.
Most importantly, hey, David.
And from New York City, the co-anchor of the CBS Evening News and the anchor of CBS Evening News Plus, John Dickerson.
Hiya, guys.
You know, I was doing a totally separate promotion about the Gabfest for somebody. Like, it wasn't Gabfest related at all, but I had to say both of your names. It was something, I can't remember what it was. Just talking about something. I have to say both your names. And I've gotten so habituated to saying John Dickerson that I said John Dickerson in this way that I think people are listening are going to be like, that's wrong. Does that person have a speech difficulty? Why is he podcasting? This week on the Gabfest, we are going to talk about the megalithic budget-busting, Medicaid walloping House budget bill with Harvard's Jason Furman, the former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. Then the Department of Justice is engaging in a series of what sure look like politicized investigations and prosecutions of political figures who oppose Trump. Can anyone stop this? Then what is Project Esther? Who is behind it? Why has it been so successful? Plus, we will have cocktail chatter.
Put us in a box. Go ahead. That just gives us something to break out of. Because the Next Generation 2025 GMC Terrain Elevation is raising the standard of what comes standard. As far as expectations go, why meet them when you can shatter them? What we choose to challenge, we challenge completely. We are professional grade. Visit GMC.com to learn more.
Every day, thousands of Comcast engineers and technologists, like Kunle, put people at the heart of everything they create.
In the average household, there are dozens of connected devices. Here in the Comcast family, we're building an integrated in-home Wi-Fi solution for millions of families like my own. It brings people together in meaningful ways.
Kunle and his team are building a Wi-Fi experience that connects 1 billion devices every year. Learn more about how Comcast is redefining the future of connectivity at comcastcorporation.com/Wi-Fi.
Jason Furman, the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Obama, a professor of economics at Harvard, has a great op-ed in the New York Times this week about the deforming effects of the tax provisions in the Republican monster budget bill that passed last night. Jason is here to talk to us about the big, beautiful bill, the grotesque piece of legislation the Republicans have wiggled through the House that would extend the Trump tax cuts and taxes on some tips and overtime, restore some more tax write-offs for state and local taxes, increase Homeland Security spending a ton for wall building and detention centers, increase defense spending, slash Medicaid and lots of other discretionary spending. So, Jason, before we get to you, hello, first of all.
Hello.
John, what happened with the bill last night? Where do we stand? What happens now that it's through?
In an early morning vote, it passed 215 to 214 along party lines. Basically, the Speaker of the House called the bluff of the deficit hawks in his party. They didn't want to buck their president, or not enough of them wanted to. And as you said, this would cut taxes in various different schedules, which Jason can explain. The tax breaks on tipped wages and overtime are, I believe, temporary. I can't remember whether and I don't know if in this current version of the bill, the 2017 tax cuts are go into, I can't remember what the sunsetting of that is, but it adds about $3 trillion to the deficit over the next 10 years. And depending on how you count, but the Congressional Budget Office said that more than 7 to 8.6 million people will lose Medicaid coverage. And those are about the headlines. I'm sure there are many more, but I haven't actually looked at exactly what passed last night. But now it goes on to the Senate, and we'll have a different drama there.
So, Jason, over the last week, the last of the U.S. Rating agencies that had not downgraded the U.S. slightly from the highest level of creditworthiness downgraded us, Moody's. And there does seem to be, yields on Treasury bills have risen. What is that telling us about how the world of investors, at least, and businesses feel about this bill?
Well, what's been so interesting about the last week is we have a return to something we saw in April, which is the so-called Sell America trade. It's not completely unusual to see interest rates go up. Sometimes they go up, sometimes they go down. Right now, they are unusually high, basically the highest they've been since before the financial crisis. But what is especially unusual is that at the same time interest rates are going up, the dollar is getting weaker. And over the last couple of days, the stock market has gone down as well. And that combination of the three, you normally don't see them all moving in those directions at the same time. That's been called the Sell America trade, and it reflects a lack of confidence in our country. Back in April, that lack of confidence was because of tariffs. Now that lack of confidence is because of this big deficit increase.
And why would the big deficit increase cause that lack of confidence? What is it? I mean, we've had deficits. We have an enormous debt. We've had deficits. Why this one?
What has been so unusual is the last couple of years, we have a deficit that is larger than any time in our history, except World War II, the financial crisis, and COVID. So when you have a low unemployment rate, strong growth, that's when you want your budget to be in better shape. Instead, it's in worse shape. And what this bill would do is it would make it worse. So, if you measure things in trillions of dollars, our deficit right now is about $2 trillion. This could take it close to $3 trillion within another year or two. Percent of GDP, which is the way economists like to talk about these things, from about 6% of GDP, maybe to 8% of GDP. And by the way, if these higher interest rates really stick, that would further compound and mean even larger deficits. Right now, the forecasts all assume interest rates will come back down. That may not be such a good bet anymore.
Jason, when you were writing about this in the Times this week, you were saying that the consequences for ordinary Americans would be severe. And you were explaining that the debt drives up interest rates, and that means that people have to pay more for mortgages. And I get all of that, but I have this burning question, which is like, how long do these effects take to kick in? Because one of the things that I keep thinking about is whether people are going to understand the cause and effect, whether it's immediate enough to feel urgent that in a way that would affect people's political choices, or whether we're talking about medium to long-term impacts and consequences that are going to be easy for to come up with alternate explanations for when the Republicans have to face the voters.
Yeah. So first of all, the legislation does include some things which are pretty immediate. 10 million people would lose their Medicaid coverage. That happens relatively quickly. Those people will, I think, understand the cause and effect link. Some of them are probably Trump voters that will feel more skeptical about it. But on the broader macroeconomics, you're really right to raise that political question. Back when we were doing insanely sky-high levels of tariffs, if we had kept those, we very likely would have had a recession very quickly, and all but the most hardened MAGA supporters would have understood the cause and effect. Huge, crazy tariffs, stock market crashes, recession follows. They've pulled back from the really, really sky-high tariffs, and so now a recession is very, very far from inevitable. And instead, this fiscal plan is, as implicit in your question, it's much more of a medium and long-term threat to the economy than it is an immediate threat to the economy in terms of things like interest rates, slower growth. I don't expect this to be anything like a sort of precipitate a recession. And so, yeah, why not give away a bunch of money today? And, people will suffer the consequences in the future and they'll never quite blame you. That is some of the political calculus here, and that political calculus is probably not completely wrong.
And also the people who get elected next are the ones who are going to have to clean up the mess, presumably by raising taxes or doing something else, right? And that will be a hard sell.
Yeah.
Like, they'll get blamed.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I show my class when I teach it something that basically takes, if you add a certain amount to the deficit and debt, what does it do to incomes? And it sort of starts slowly and then gets faster and faster. And if you just cut off the picture after, say, 4 years, why not do it? It's just not that big an effect. If you look 10 years later, it's quite a big effect. And yeah, we have a U.S. fiscal system right now where the Republicans have been consistently saying, we'll stick it to the Democrats and let them deal with the mess. Obama and Clinton, I think, largely did deal with the mess. Biden decided he wasn't going to be a sucker and do that again. So he actually he added to the debt, didn't subtract from it. And, this isn't a total crisis. I don't think the United States is going to collapse because of this. But, but it's not a good situation to be in, and it's definitely not sustainable.
And it contributes to massive intergenerational pain. Jason, one of the problems with the way people like me cover budgets is that a lot of time is spent on Speaker Johnson's effort to first manage people who want to increase the SALT deduction. And then it's, a quick discussion about work requirements and moving up the implementation of work requirements for Medicaid. And the plot gets lost pretty quickly. One of the things that gets lost is all of the choices that were never discussed or made, whether it's actually different tax rates that would go up. In other words, you don't have to keep the 2017 tax cut as it was originally designed. You could allow some of the cuts to stay and some to increase. You could also talk about closing some tax preferences. Can you just give us a couple of things that just have never been a part of the conversation that if we were trying to figure out how to deal with the fiscal picture, we might actually want to talk about if we were trying to do it in a kind of a rational way?
Yeah, no, I mean, I called this tax deform because it definitely is not a rational way. And that's not just my opinion here. If you look at right of center organizations like the American Enterprise Institute and the Tax Foundation, they have been putting out plans that were much, much more thoughtful than this one. And they have been pulling their hair out at all the deficit increases, complications, lack of pro-growth provisions in all of this. In fact, AEI put out a plan that would have been a tax reform that would have been revenue neutral rather than costing trillions of dollars. So what would I do? Just to make it very simple within the paradigm we're in now, there were elements of the way the 2017 law changed the tax base that actually made good sense. They raised the standard deduction, they increased the child tax credit, and they cut back on tax benefits for things like mortgages and state and local. I would make all of that permanent. Then I would do some more for children, probably some more to broaden the tax base and reduce loopholes, especially some of the ones that high-income households take advantage of. And then the final thing is I just wouldn't cut tax rates because that is the thing that is just completely unaffordable.
I think, with Trump, so many things have to do with his ego and his identity. And I think so much of his ego and identity was, we're going to keep my tax cuts. Like, we're going to keep it. Was there a fiscally responsible bill that just kept exactly what he had done, what he did in 2017? Is that what you just described?
I described a lot of what he did in 2017, but not his rate reductions and not certain other like high income giveaways that he included in it, but his sort of middle class changes to the tax base. So that was a part of 2017. That's what I would have continued and built on. You could even, somebody wants to call it the Trump tax reform. That's okay with me. I don't think that was seriously considered. He, President himself personally did briefly flirt with a version of a little piece of that, which was having the top tax rate, which right now is 37%, go back to the 39.6% that it had been under Obama. He, I think, probably sincerely would have liked that to have happened. I don't think he was particularly passionate about it happening, and there was no way that congressional Republicans would have entertained it.
Jason, one of the questions I have for you as an economist and somebody who really looks at the effects of government activity on the U.S. economy, like you're a world expert on that. So there's a huge resorting of priorities in what the Trump administration is doing, both in this bill, but also in general, where, you're gutting your university. I'm sure you're right now at Harvard. You're probably, living on gruel or something because of what's happening at Harvard. But there's the sort of the cuts to research. There's the cuts to all kinds of government activities. There are the cuts to people getting Medicaid or certain other kinds of government benefits. In what ways will we feel the macro and economic effects of that? When will we feel the effects of, research is not getting funded, and therefore there's this impact on the broader economy?
Yeah. So look, I'm not that worried about, me or the people around me at Harvard. What's depressing is I had a meal the other day with a friend who is in the medical school doing research on how to solve sepsis, disease that kills millions of people every year. And that research has stopped. And you just sit there listening incredulously. Now, that's stopping. What will it do to GDP? Over the next couple of years, nothing. Even past that, not sure if that will or won't do something to GDP. GDP doesn't necessarily measure when you save lives or improve the quality of lives. But boy, does that really matter. And, I have been heartened to some degree that I think there is a decently broad understanding that the funding cuts primarily are about medical research, that our universities really are important to innovation and American economic strength, and that the cost of this will fall on lots and lots of people, not primarily on the people at Harvard. The issue, again, to go back to Emily's point politically, is, it's all indirect. If you die of sepsis because this research was stopped 7 years from now, when you otherwise would have been saved, you'll have no idea, no clue at all. And so the cause and effect is a little bit complicated. More people understand it than I would have expected, but it's a hard thing to understand and to follow. The very, very last thing I'd say, by the way, is, when I think about universities economically, I'd love to have a great tax code. I'd love to have great regulation. I'd love to have great universities. If I could only pick one of those three, I'd pick the universities. And that's why California has been so successful and why Silicon Valley is there. It wasn't because of the taxes, wasn't because of the regulation. It was because of the university.
And why? You mean you'd pick them because they are engines of economic growth and prosperity, or for another reason? Exactly that. I mean, innovation is, innovators care a bit about tax rates. They care a bit about regulation. I try to get those things right, not get them wrong. But, forming these connected webs of people, whether it's people in my neighborhood working on cancer or robotics, people in Silicon Valley, working on, AI or microchips, is just something that, every other country in the world would love to have, would love to figure out how to reproduce. And for some reason, we're bent on, destroying it here in our country.
Jason, the Sell America signals have been one of the only things have been something that has given the president pause. He withdrew. So what's your anticipation about how the markets will react to this budget as it goes forward? Well, one of the things that seems to happen in the market is they see past some of the coverage and certainly the nose counting coverage of budgets. In other words, they know the real fiscal effects of some of these choices. Do you think this is just a momentary thing, or do you think that there is a real possibility here for and wouldn't that have an immediate economic impact to the extent that bond activity affects mortgage and credit card payments and stuff?
Yeah. So what happens in financial markets is when things aren't expected. So April 2nd, the original reciprocal tariff announcement took everyone, including me, by surprise. I thought there'd be tariffs. That was just much, much more than I possibly could have imagined. The budget right now was largely expected, largely priced in. I think when you adjust it for some of the gimmicks, they do things like have some provisions that end after 4 years that no one thinks will actually end after 4 years. It's probably maybe a bit worse than expected. I think the Senate will probably make it even worse, but it wasn't a total shock, which is why we've seen movements in markets, but they haven't been nearly as dramatic or headline grabbing as the April tariff-related movements. Those April movements did contribute to the tariffs being taken back. I think on the fiscal side, there is just so much more momentum, so much more conviction on the part of the Republican Party that I would be surprised if they reverse course and don't go ahead with this. The question, though, is 1981, Ronald Reagan raised the deficit a lot, interest rates went up a lot, and he came back and undid a bunch of it in 1982, undid even more in 83, 4, 5, 6, and 7. It's really hard to imagine that happening now, but if things do genuinely get, much worse, maybe we would be in place for some partial reversal here.
Jason Furman, former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, professor at Harvard. Jason, thanks for coming on the Gabfest again.
Thanks for having me.
This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Mint Mobile. Summer is just around the corner, and the folks at Mint Mobile have a hot take. Getting a summer bod is out, and getting your savings bod is in. This spring and summer, it's time to get skimpy wireless bills and fat wallets. And with premium wireless plans for just $15 a month, you can have both without breaking a sweat or the bank. Even Slate's president, Charlie Kammerer, is using Mint Mobile. And Charlie says more people should be trying Mint out. It was really easy for him to switch providers. The SIM card was shipped to his home. They let him use his existing phone. He didn't have to change his phone number. And he thinks the Mint Mobile deal is amazing. So say bye-bye to your overpriced wireless plans, jaw-dropping monthly bills, and unexpected overages. This year, skip breaking a sweat and breaking the bank. Get your summer savings and shop premium wireless plans at mintmobile.com/Gabfest. That's mintmobile.com/Gabfest. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5-gigabyte plan required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customer offer for first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details.
This episode is brought to you by Planned Parenthood Federation of America. You've seen the headlines. The Trump administration is attacking sexual and reproductive health care. It's the kind of big, urgent topic that deserves more than just cocktail chatter. But Planned Parenthood Federation of America's commitment to care never stops, no matter what. Planned Parenthood health centers are still here, providing compassionate, affordable, and judgment-free care for everyone. Some lawmakers are trying to end abortion access, slash funding people rely on for care, and shut down Planned Parenthood health centers. These attacks only deepen the healthcare crisis they created, putting millions at risk. But here's the truth. Planned Parenthood has been there for over a century because of supporters like you. With your commitment, they can keep defending the care people need, whether it's birth control, cancer screenings, abortion, gender-affirming care, or sex education. Planned Parenthood believes everyone should have the freedom to make decisions about their own bodies, no matter what, and that's something worth fighting for. When freedoms are at risk, what you do during pivotal moments matters most. Join the fight for health and rights by making a gift to support Planned Parenthood at plannedparenthood.org/defend.
This episode is brought to you by Built. Built is perfect for those looking to earn airline miles and hotel points just by paying rent on time. There's no cost to join, and just by paying rent, you unlock flexible points that can be transferred to your favorite hotels and airlines, a future rent payment, your next Lyft ride, and more. When you pay rent through Built, you unlock 2 powerful benefits. First, you earn one of the industry's most valuable points on rent every month. Second, you gain access to exclusive neighborhood benefits in your city. Built's neighborhood benefits are things like extra points on dining out, complimentary post-workout shakes, free mats or towels at your favorite fitness studios, and unique experiences that only Built members can access. And when you're ready to travel, Built points can be converted to your favorite miles and hotel points around the world, meaning your rent can literally take you places. Start paying rent through Built and take advantage of your neighborhood benefits by going to joinbuilt.com/Gabfest. That's joinbilt.com/Gabfest. Make sure to use joinbuilt.com/Gabfest to sign up for Built today. even before President Trump was re-inaugurated, we had been talking about different ways in which American justice could be distorted in the Trump presidency. And what has happened has outstripped even Emily Bazelon's wildest speculations. Today, we're going to turn to an aspect of it that we've touched on before, haven't dealt with in any depth, which is the selective prosecution and investigation of political opponents. New Jersey's acting attorney general, Alina Habba, who was a Trump personal attorney, has now charged a sitting member of Congress, LaMonica McIver, a Democrat, with allegedly assaulting federal officials in a protest at an ICE facility. I strongly urge you to watch the video to understand what the assault is supposed to be. The administration also has dropped charges against New York Mayor Eric Adams in a quid pro quo to get him to do their bidding. Now appears to be ginning up an investigation of his opponent, Andrew Cuomo. The DOJ is also talking about taking away a key check on political corruption prosecutions. The public integrity section that vets all investigation of political officials appears to be about to be bypassed so that individual prosecutors at the federal U.S. attorney level can bring political prosecutions without any constraint. And also, like just in a side note, the Secret Service, with a helping hand from the DOJ's FBI, is investigating former FBI Chief James Comey for allegedly threatening the president by posting a photograph of shells on a beach arranged in the number 8647. So, Emily, what's the common thread in what's going on here? I mean, it seems totally obvious, but just state it.
The common thread is that people are being investigated and prosecuted for things they would never have been investigated and prosecuted for before this administration. And that means there is a breakdown in some of the internal checks within the Justice Department that prevent these kinds of things from going forward. And I think what matters is that the reward system has totally changed, right? You can have all these internal norms. You can have this highly professional ethos within the Justice Department with thousands of career lawyers who are standing up for, the kind of basic values of being a prosecutor, which is that you are supposed to have like a solid factual predicate to investigate someone, and you're supposed to really think you can win a conviction. And those things, I think, are lacking in a lot of these cases. And part of it is that some of the checks and balances have just been gutted. The public integrity section is a good example. I mean, they're talking about formally just taking it out of the process that it had been involved in, where it had to approve not just like opening particular investigations against politicians, but also approving steps of the process. But even if they don't formally remove it, it's a shell of its former self. Most of the people in it have quit. The people who are left know that they're not supposed to be causing problems for, for prosecutors like Alina Habba. And she is, in her own view, kind of cashing in politically for this prosecution of McIver. I mean, McIver is a congresswoman from an opposing party who was demonstrating. She was doing, a kind of fundamental act related to being in Congress, but also just to like free speech. And yes, there was a scrum and people were pushing each other. But the notion that, she should be charged with assault, like it's, I don't even know what adjective to use about how untoward that is. And yet it seems like in this MAGA moment that is being rewarded and celebrated. And so that's what we're seeing. I mean, another example of an internal check that I think is not performing its job anymore is the Office of Legal Counsel in the Justice Department, which was also seen as like, well, they have to decide that everything's legal before an executive order can be issued. Well, no, they don't, or they can just be turned into like another yes man part of the operation. And all of this, for people who care about the Justice Department, prosecutorial ethics, legal ethics, like this is really, really heartbreaking, but it's happening in front of our eyes.
And we should note that that demonstration was in part connected to other ways in which the power of the executive branch is being used, which is whether people who are deported are being given any kind of due process, including people who are in the states legally. Cato did a analysis of the Venezuelans deported to El Salvador and found that at least 50, if not more, were in the United States legally. And I would just add that the public integrity section at DOJ was born out of Watergate in the early 1970s. And the idea was to create a specialized unit removed from the direct political pressure of the presidency that could ensure investigations and prosecutions of elected officials were based on merit and not political vendettas that you talked about, Emily. So here you have an administration coming in saying we're going to depoliticize the Department of Justice, and doing exactly the opposite, not just removing the constraints that would keep it from acting politically, but then obviously acting politically.
So if you watch this video of McIver allegedly assaulting a federal officer, it is just absurd. There's she's in a scrum. She sort of, uses her elbows to sort of push and shove a little bit, like a tiny
But she's
amount.
being
The
pushed
officer,
from behind, it seems like.
Yeah. And the officer who she, I think, has been going to be accused of assaulting doesn't even notice that they're being assaulted. So it's just absurd. And it's clear, like this, this prosecution will go nowhere. She will not be convicted, but that doesn't matter, does it? Like there may be a sense among people, if people don't go to jail, the legal system is held, but it's not true, because if you are mired in an investigation and prosecution, it's so stressful. You cannot live your life. It costs you a ton of money. And even if you are cleared at the end, it costs you time, money, energy. And most of all, it deters other people who might be less brave than you, from standing up and exercising their rights of doing the protest that they want to do. And so it's an unbelievably effective form of intimidation to engage in prosecution that goes, even when that prosecution will definitely go nowhere. Do you agree, Emily? Agree or disagree?
No, I mean, I feel like that is a really important point to keep making. And also, there are just a number of people in this position, which was clear in the intro that you did. I mean, I was on TV talking about this the other night, and there are like a bunch of photos on the screen. And you just realize, like, when it starts to be a pattern, you can chill and intimidate and deter in all these different directions. And we're seeing that. I mean, the caving in of the big law firms to the Trump administration's demands are connected to all of this.
And we should throw Chris Krebs in there.
Yep.
Former
Absolutely.
head of
Miles Taylor.
Yeah.
Supposedly they're investigating Andrew Cuomo. I mean, it's getting to be quite a list.
Can I ask a question about Haba as a U.S. attorney? We've had U.S. attorneys with political desires in their lives. But Emily, put her in context with respect to somebody acting so overtly. I mean, literally saying going to turn New Jersey red and that kind of thing, who has been a U.S. attorney who's acted that overtly politically. Am I forgetting some obvious example of others?
She has zero experience, but it's not just that. I mean, she has been fined for bringing frivolous lawsuits on behalf of President Trump. She seems to be clearly auditioning for a Fox News host or running for political office. And I mean, look, she's probably not going to be confirmed. After 120 days, this interim appointment will end, and that will probably be the end. And maybe it'll be the end of the investigation against Lamanna McIver. We'll see. But it is a traversing of these lines that, again, the idea that prosecutors are not purely political actors is like really important, but it's a norm and it can blur, right? And sometimes in states, often they are directly elected. The idea that U.S. attorneys have held themselves apart from the political fray and have been, in general, the rule is that you're very careful not to seem like you are trying to take political revenge. Like that turns out to be very fragile. And as far as I can tell, Helena Baba is paying zero price. I don't think she would have expected to be confirmed anyway. So she's just using this moment in the spotlight to advance herself, it seems like.
Totally agree with everything you just said, Emily. And it's true that Helena Baba will not be confirmed. I think it's very unlikely that she will actually even be put up for a Senate vote, and she will not be confirmed. She will have done her 120 days. Similarly, here where I live in D.C., we had a guy, Ed Martin, who was a Jan 6th defense lawyer, basically, who ended up as acting U.S. attorney, and it became clear he was not going to get confirmed. They pulled him. And so, this is a pattern with this Trump administration, is to have these highly political people who are engaged in extremely political prosecutions. I guess there's one part of me that is slightly heartened by what's happening, which is that there are only two examples like this, that there still are U.S. attorneys, even U.S. attorneys that are acting under the color of Trump and are probably Trumpists and appointed by Trump, who are behaving relatively normally. So while it is true that, yes, in one jurisdiction, New Jersey, we have the clearly specious prosecution of a member of Congress, that's one that has happened in one. It's not happening everywhere. So some of the norms are holding, maybe.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, God bless all the people who are doing their prosecutorial duties. I will note that Ed Martin has a powerful position inside DOJ now. He's now like supposedly the head or involved with the unit that's supposed to be, quote, preventing the weaponization of the Justice Department. In other words, like weaponizing the Justice Department. I mean, he's in the mix of deciding whether to prosecute Jack Smith, for example, who was the special prosecutor in the criminal cases against President Trump.
And Ed Martin said the very thing we were talking about a second ago, which he said, even when we don't charge people, we're going to basically use the power of this office to cause misery and distress. If we are going to shame them, we're going to shame these people. We're going to cause them misery.
Yeah. Can we also just briefly note another important, if wonkier move the Justice Department made this week was just to end a bunch of consent decrees with police departments in cities around the country where either the Obama or the Biden administration had gone and investigated and found a pattern or practice of racial discrimination, kind of, cops like going after people, creating racial disparities that the Justice Department folks could not be explained by, innocent reasons. And consent decrees are really hard to make work. Sometimes they can become an impediment. They can go on for a long time. On the other hand, when you just remove the whole thing, which is at least currently what's happened, you take the federal government out of the picture of trying to make sure that these state and local officials are doing their jobs well and properly. And just let's think about how much power the police have in people's daily lives. You want to make sure the police departments are operating ethically and well, and that is especially important to the communities that they actually police, right? Mostly people who are poor, lots of Black and brown people. And it's a tool that you have to use carefully, but just taking it out of the toolbox and disparaging it and effectively telling these police departments, like, go ahead, we've taken off any of the constraints. And even to say that the whole enterprise was a terrible idea, which is what Harmeet Dillon, the head of the Civil Rights Division at DOJ, said. It's really troubling.
The idea that consent decrees are not complicated is not what anybody's saying. But, I thought the cases in Chicago and Baltimore, they worked out kind of, they came through the process and that those police departments were better. And there are reasons for all of the ways you could imagine consent decrees being micromanaging and a problem. The Civil Rights Division has specialized expertise in police reform on these questions. And there's obviously disparities by race in policing and in homicides by police. Those figures are pretty well known and have been cited over the years. Also, federal investigations have more resources than a local community would have. And also federal court orders, they provide legitimacy and leverage for anybody internally in a community, particularly within the police department, who wants to try to reform things, because they have to fight incredibly strong forces within their communities or within the police union. So there's a way in which consent decrees offer cover for communities that's now gone. Although I guess in some cases you have consent decrees with states. So a city could use the leverage of state consent decrees. But anyway, that's just some of the ways in which they can be useful.
This episode of Gabfest Reads is brought to you by Quince. When a new shirt or pants become your go-to, lightweight, comfortable, always on point? Well, that's what you can expect with Quince. My girlfriend just bought a pair of pants from Quince, and she cannot stop talking about them. She cannot stop talking about how comfortable they are, how much better they look than the similar kind of brand that she bought from an expensive retailer, and how little she paid for it. Quince has all the things you actually want to wear, like organic cotton silk polos, European linen beach shorts, comfortable pants that work for everything from backyard hangs to nice dinners. And Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes. Go to quince.com/GabfestReads for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/Gabfest Reads to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/Gabfest Reads.
You may get a little excited when you shop at Burlington.
What a low price! You see that? They have my favorite brand! It's like a whole new Burlington! I can buy two!
I'm saving so much!
Burlington saves you up to 60% off other retailers' prices every day. Will it be the low prices or the great brands? Burlington. Deals? Brands? Wow! I told you so. Styles and selections vary by store.
Last night here in Washington, 2 Israeli embassy staffers, a young couple, were murdered outside the Capitol Jewish Museum following an event there. It seems to have been a targeted killing. The reports that I'm reading in the paper identify a suspect who was yelling about freeing Palestine who committed the murder. It's an act of terror and an act of anti-Semitic terror, arguably, or anti-Israel terror for sure. We want to talk this week about anti-Semitism and the way it is playing out in the Trump administration. In particular, we were taken by an article in the New York Times by Emily's colleague Katie Baker about something called Project Esther that was revealed this week, which was an effort conceived mostly by conservative evangelical Christians to stop, limit, constrain pro-Palestinian protests by using the tools of law and coercion and government funding to label almost all criticism of Israel as anti-Semitism. And so we have seen in the first several months of the Trump administration, an incredibly successful, monumentally successful effort by the Trump administration to weaponize the charge of anti-Semitism against universities, against students, against organizations, and has taken many different forms. It has led to the defunding of universities. Whole entire research arms of universities are under threat of losing their massive amounts of federal funding, a kind of massive legal war against Harvard, the capitulation of Columbia, arrests of students who had protests, the labeling of students who had been part of protests as supporters of Hamas, exposing institutions, people, organizations to risks of defunding, expulsion, even prosecution. And when you look back, you see that there's something called Project Esther, which anticipates this and which seems to have been a blueprint for what the Trump administration is doing. So, Emily, let's start with you. What are the core elements of Project Esther? Where does it come from? And how do we see it now seemingly being adopted by the Trump administration?
It comes from the Heritage Foundation. It seems sort of like Project 2025, right? Where you lay out lots of goals and you're not saying, oh, I'm controlling the Trump administration and the federal government, but you've clearly given them a lot of ideas about how to go forward. And, it has all the elements that you were just laying out and is, has this idea that I really am having trouble even saying with a straight face, which is that the traditional Zionist and Jewish groups in the United States aren't doing enough to defend these same principles. Meanwhile, the Anti-Defamation League has, I think, in many ways been cheering the Trump administration on. And this terrible killing in Washington of these Israeli embassy employees, is horrible. And it's also only going to add to all of that dynamic. Anyway, so yeah, I think the idea of Project Esther is to use basically all the power of the federal government that's possible to kind of harness it to punishing people who disagree. And there's a range of kinds of disagreements and lots of discussions to be had about when it crosses the line into anti-Semitism. But this is so clearly an enormous overreach.
It seems to define criticism of Israel or support for Palestinians as being support for Hamas. When you're defining George Soros and Bernie Sanders as part of the Hamas caucus, you've gone about as far as you can go.
Well, I think that's actually an interesting indication through the whole thing is the number of Jews who get told that they're anti-Semites in these definitions. There has to be space, obviously, for self-criticism. Not just self-criticism, other people should be able to criticize too. I mean, like what Israel is doing right now in Gaza is like unspeakable and has been for a long time, and it's going on and on.
It is literally unspeakable now because
it's unspeakable.
Because you will get shut down if you try to speak about it. But go ahead.
Anyway, it's just like it's senseless. I just like honestly, it's very hard for me to understand. But
right.
I mean,
just to get at this point, John, that you were, I think, to be nodding at. So it's not. I feel like at the core thing that is happening with Project Esther, the basic, the acorn from which it is growing is a redefinition of anti-Semitism. The anti-Semitism has been redefined from hostility, targeted, directed hostility towards Jews for being Jews, to now encompass the idea that anti-Israel sentiment, anti-Zionist sentiment, skepticism about the existence of Israel, and more importantly, concern about particular policies that a particular government of Israel is pursuing. Those are now in the ambit of anti-Semitism. They're in the catchment area of anti-Semitism now in a way that I think American Jews have always been anxious to keep those things separate. Like there does seem to have to be room for criticism of Israel and Israel policies as a government, which don't signify anti-Semitism. They signify concern over the policies a particular nation is pursuing.
Look, like for me, parts of this are hard because I do think that sometimes the anti-Zionist sentiment and rhetoric blurs into being anti-Semitic. Like there are lines, right?
Sure.
And I would just interject that the Anti-Defamation League reports an increase of anti-Semitic incidents both in the last year and a huge jump in the last decade.
I think what's so hard about this for me personally is that I hear about some of that. I believe in some of its reality. And yet at the same time, it is vital to keep open a space for people to object to the policies of the Israeli government, especially right now. Like it's so clearly objectionable to so many people for completely valid and understandable reasons. And there is just something very distorting about the way this whole conversation is unfolding and the way the might of the federal government is now coming down on people who were vulnerable and marginalized to begin with.
I guess the essential claim, though, isn't that the essential claim about Project Esther is that it's essentially a Trojan horse for authoritarianism. In other words, that the cause of anti-Semitism and fighting it is it has a larger goal, or at least is allowing a larger thing to happen, which is what you're talking about, Emily, in terms of shutting down dissent and using this as an effort to shut down dissent. I do wonder when you start defining things so broadly, and start, and certainly the policies when someone is being thrown in jail for being one of 4 authors to write an op-ed, and that's the only piece of evidence the government can come up with. And the piece of evidence within the op-ed about Israeli policy is basically quoting the International Criminal Court. You've really you've gone a far way. And I wonder if you use that stringent definition of anti-Semitism, how then do you square that with the new U.S. friendship with Qatar, which has given support and aid to Hamas over the years?
Right. And also these, images of like George Soros towering over the world in this like conspiracy-minded, domination trope, which is like, I mean, so many Jews have been killed over the centuries for exactly this kind of anti-Semitism. Like it's all mixed up and hypocritical, right? You can always find the example on the right that proves that. And I think you're right, John, the Trojan horse part, that's the most important thing that's happening here. And I would far rather countenance some anti-Semitic speech and protest than have all of this shut down. And, I recognize that saying that on the day after 2 people got killed in this particularly horrible way, coming out of the Jewish Museum, like being identified with Israel, like that's tough. I feel that tension, but this is just like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to this point that if this is a Trojan horse for authoritarianism, Jewish organizations have been a little bit too quiet and wan about this. They have not stood up for the principles of free expression, for the values of universities, for the needs of university research. They're not standing up for all the Jewish scholars and Jewish students who are losing their funding, for the loss of life, Jewish and otherwise, that will occur because there is not research, life-saving research that's done. They are allowing this destruction of institutions that have done so much to bring Jews and other Americans health, prosperity, security, happiness. And that's unsettling to me, that Jewish organizations are not standing up enough about this.
Totally agree, except I think you're being too broad brush. I think that is a totally fair criticism to mount against the ADL and probably other groups. But there are people who are standing up, right? Like 600 rabbis signed a letter. Like there are examples of Jewish leadership trying to address exactly the point that you're making, David.
The other piece, and Emily, I'm really interested in your thoughts on this, because I feel like you and I have had off-mic conversations about this over time, over years. I feel like one of the things Project Esther has done effectively is to get people like me to totally withdraw from this fight. I think you end up, Project Esther sort of like it creates a cadre of, or this seeing anti-Semitism everywhere. It creates a cadre of evangelical Christians who are quite conservative and very strongly identified Jews, some of whom are quite religious, some of whom aren't, but who really are very proud of their Jewish identity and feel it strongly and associate with Israel, who see anti-Semitism and feel it and are worried about it and want to do everything to fight it. And then you end up with all these progressives who are disgusted by what Israel is doing in Gaza and also become anti-Zionist. But there's a huge middle, of which I kind of count myself, of American Jews who are kind of mostly Zionist by temperament, by sort of history, by having associations with Israel, admire what a lot of Israel has done over the years, think Hamas is wicked, think that Israel's war is grossly and inhumanely disproportionate, but just don't want to get in the middle of this. And we withdraw. And I feel like that itself is a cost of what's happening.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very real and painful. I mean, I totally count myself as someone who's really proud to be Jewish. I love being Jewish, but I do feel like this moment is ruining aspects of it, or just making it much more complicated to know what ground to stand on. And I find myself in various situations where I'm just uncomfortable. And then I just try to think of what's really at stake? What's the most important? What are the values of Judaism or of my life, whatever, that are fundamental? And this idea of standing up for other people who are vulnerable and making sure that one's own victimhood does not become an excuse for terrible anti-democratic actions on the part, that seems really fundamental to me.
John, can we close with I have a question for you to close this, which is sort of a political question. Do you think that this campaign, this effort to sort of use anti-Semitism to attack elite universities, to identify lots of people, especially foreign national students, as Hamas supporters, the massive amount of attention that's been drawn to this, do you think this is a political win for the Trump administration? Do they gain from this, or is it just they are passionate about it, they're going to pursue it, and it's the political question is kind of irrelevant?
I think the latter. I don't know. I think that I think this, to the extent that this connects with the overall general crackdown on, and we've talked about this before, crackdown on migrants, for which the president had support, but he is now losing support for it as individual tactics become more publicized in the various different cases where it's clearly the power of the state has gone overboard. And the idea that there is basically now a number of instances, many instances in which the administration either knew or didn't care about the basic ideas of due process. I think that is having a political problem. Although, again, Marco Rubio, who moves with these political shifts, is really embracing the idea of maximalist response. This is not with respect to anti-Semitism, but it is in the same basket of ideas. But I don't know if that works the same way on university campuses. I don't know if people are going to say, because in part your heartstrings can be tugged by, a young woman being arrested on the street because of an op-ed by people in masks, where it's harder to attach to a similarly compelling story when it comes to, research funding at a university. Or so I think in that sense, in the sense of some of the efforts to crack down against dissent, I'm not sure that has a lasting political downside.
Right. That's the problem. It's not that people like it. It's that, is it going to make or break their vote in the end?
Let us go to cocktail chatter when, Emily Labaz, you are sitting with your pup, having a pup cup, talking to your pup about some exciting thing. What will you be talking to her about?
Well, this is very one note of me, but Bruce Springsteen during the campaign performed at an event or maybe multiple events for Kamala Harris. And he also now, according to President Trump, should be criminally investigated. And I just wanted to recommend a post on Substack by Bob Bauer explaining why this is totally illegal and should not go forward. All the reasons why you're allowed to perform. It's your First Amendment right to perform on behalf of a campaign. And this is just not a valid exercise of power.
And I think this is in response, of course, to Springsteen being very vocal.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
While on his European tour about Trump.
Critical of Trump. Yes, precisely.
Critical of Trump. I do feel I love Bruce Springsteen. I ride or die for Bruce Springsteen. Do it on your American tour, man. It's really easy to go in front of European audiences and say all this stuff. But can you do that? Do it in New Jersey. Do it in your show in San Antonio.
Good challenge.
He probably doesn't have an American tour going on. John Dickerson, what's your you know what your chatter is not, John?
What is not my chatter?
Your chatter is the thing you sent me this week. John sent me a clip of Bob Dylan playing a Pogues song, because I'm a big Pogues fan. And I just was so taken by that, John, because I don't like to listen to modern Dylan, because I just feel like every time I've heard, when I used to hear him play in the early 90s, I was like, this sounds terrible. I hate listening to him. But what you sent me was lovely. It was a beautiful song. His voice is not nearly as bad as everyone says.
Well, I would say I would go one step further, which is, I've been going to Dylan shows since, I guess my first one was in 1986. I don't know how many I've seen. 30, 40, 50, I don't know, including in very small venues, staying up all night to get tickets at Tower Records to see him play at the Supper Club, which was a very intimate venue. And so I've seen a lot. And a lot of the time it has been excruciating. And only because I know all the songs and know what's going on, have I, enjoyed these concerts. But usually the people I'm with are like, huh? However, he has stopped yelling, which means his voice is at times, and more often than not, really sweet. And he has all of these amazing talents that he's had his whole career in terms of timing and the way he sings certain lyrics. And there is a version of Blind Willie McTell that he sings on this tour that he's on now, the Outlaw tour he's on, which is like that Pogue song. It's gorgeous. And so it's a fascinating thing that and I would suggest also there is an album they put out of his, of sort of him singing his standards, which a couple of years ago, which is in this same voice, this sort of more crooner, small club voice. And if you're a fan, it will I think it will reward. Anyway, that wasn't my chatter, but I was certainly very interested in talking about it, obviously, because I could go on all day. By the way, that album is called Shadow Kingdom. Anyway, my actual chatter very quickly is about the commissioner of health for the city of Milwaukee. I interviewed him on Evening News Plus on Wednesday night, Mike Todoritis. And I talked to him about
you have Commissioner of Public Health and you have Todoritis. That seems like a problem.
I interviewed him about the lead crisis in Milwaukee schools, which they have found lead. They have found that the lead has affected the students going to the public schools, and they're trying to mitigate it. And one of the things that they had been relying on was the CDC's specialists in lead mitigation. They were all fired. The Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert Kennedy Jr., was asked about this in a hearing. He said, "Oh no, they're helping. That's not right. They're not helping. There's nobody there. There's nobody for them to call." Like, you have a major American city in which the most vulnerable are suffering from lead poisoning, and where schooling is affected. 4 of the schools are still closed at a time where, we all know what the testing scores are, and we certainly know what the testing scores are for people in schools where they might be affected by lead paint. And so not only is there no one to help, but according to the Commissioner of Health from Milwaukee, the claims by the secretary of the department in the relevant area is just flat out not true.
My chatter is kind of in the same vein as John's in the sense that it's about what happens when government starts to break. And I think we've been wondering what are the impacts of the DOGE cuts, of the kind of radical shifts that the Trump administration has made and what the government does in its provisioning of services that people expect. And I want to point everyone to an article in The Atlantic by Joanna Thompson. The Trump administration is tempting a honeybee disaster. And it's about this fact of honeybees, which pollinate an enormous amount of American agriculture. So if you think of all those nut and fruit trees in California, they are mostly pollinated by honeybees. And there's an enormous honeybee a kind of migration every year where literally millions of hives are brought to California so that the bees can pollinate all the trees that give us the almonds that we all like to eat. And every year, a lot of these hives turn out to be dead, that the hives have died. And there are different reasons the hives die. And, it can be, 30% could be dead. This year, there were 62% of them were dead, lost colonies. And every year, the honeybee keepers have to rebuild their stocks, and they have to find new queens and build up new colonies. But they can only do that if they figure out why is it that the bees have been dying. So there's an elaborate agricultural infrastructure to figure out why honeybee colonies die, and it's fungal, it's use of certain pesticides, it's some kind of new parasite that is affecting the bees, and the Department of Agriculture has devoted a lot of resources to figuring that out, conveying that information very quickly to honeybee keepers so that they can rebuild their hives and know that they're going to be more likely to survive, so that the next season's harvest, next season's pollination season will proceed. And what happened this year? Most of those people are fired from agriculture. The instituted agriculture that's doing it has been completely crippled. The capacity has been devastated. And so the information that the beekeepers need to start to rebuild their hives that will make it more likely that their bees will survive is not being conveyed to them. And it could well create a catastrophe, or certainly a decline in American agricultural productivity, and a rise in the price of these goods, the pomegranates and almonds and walnuts that we all want. I mean, maybe not pomegranates. And it is a great example of just a self-inflicted wound. The United States has the most productive and most magnificent agriculture in the world. And it's not just because we have hardworking farmers and hardworking farm laborers who often are not in this country legally. And it is not despite the government. It is because of the government, that the government has been, through agricultural research, through the USDA, has been instrumental in making U.S. agricultural productivity the envy of the world, and making our farms the envy of the world. And this is a willful act of destruction, and we are going to start to feel it. So honeybees, check them out. Listeners, you have given us information. John, we're going to listen to a listener chatter right now because it is Dickerson related. It was so awesome. And it kind of requires people to check out a TikTok. I know that's a terrible thing to say. Who wants to check out a TikTok? Micah in Minneapolis points us to a TikTok post about a John Dickerson CBS Evening News segment on May 8th.
Hello, Gabfest. I thought you'd enjoy this TikTok post in which user Ramesnas1 offers commentary on a humble drama that occurred during Mr. Dickinson's May 8th CBS Evening News segment about the new pontiff. Over correspondent Asher Quraishi's shoulder, we see a man and woman descending the steps of a Chicago church, at the bottom of which the man appears to roll his ankle. We watch him realize the extent of his misambulation as his companion waits for him to rally, which he does, heroically shambling forth, only to realize the whole event was captured on live television. Though it lacks the grandeur of a genuine faith healing, and surely did the man's injury no good, this guileless act of masculine endurance embodies the many ordinary triumphs of spirit over suffering that surround us every day, and stands, however shakily, as a revelation in miniature of the divine mysteries of location reportage. Hope you enjoy, and thanks so much.
Have you seen this, John? Do you know about this?
No, I remember the piece from Asher Quraishi because I remember that day. I could a variety of things you have to manage. So, for example, one of the things is in one of the scripts earlier, Ed O'Keefe was in Philadelphia at a church where they were taking down the mourning drapery from Francis because Pope Leo had been named. And that was also in Usher's tag. And so we didn't want to duplicate the material. And so it was deciding which would go into which, one of 1,000 decisions you have to make in the day. So I remember Usher's hit from the front of that church, but I don't remember a dude rolling his ankle.
It's really, really funny. I watched the TikTok and the commentary is very funny. It's a dude he really bites it.
What's it called? How does one find the
I'm sure we have a link. We will put a link, and it's Ramesnas1 is the TikTok account, but we will put a link in the show notes. We're not the only Slate podcast worth listening to this week. Decoder Ring, Willa Paskin's great podcast, has an episode called Blinded by the Headlights, which is all about the weird thing that has happened to car headlights.
Yes.
They're much brighter than they used to be.
Oh,
and
my
people
God.
are so rageful.
Yes. Thank you for someone, because I feel like I'm going crazy. And then I'm like, do people have what are the lights called? Those
brights? Halogen?
Thank you. Do people have their brights on all the time? And I just am I've been so confounded by this.
If you feel like everyone's driving around with their high beams on all the time, it's not your imagination.
Oh, thank you, Willa Paskin.
Wow, that is so great. It's so true.
Except it's not fixing the problem, I suppose. She can't do that on her podcast.
I think there are efforts in Europe, actually. I think Europe is now cracking down on this. So maybe, if Europe is cracking down on it, America will just double down on it, probably. But
right.
Anyway, Decoder Ring, Blinded by the Headlights, captured the imagination of both Emily Bazelon and John Dickerson. So got to be good, eh? That is all for our episode this week. We also have a bonus episode in your feed. We'll talk about the potential settlement the United States is going to make with Ashley Babbitt's family, the January 6th rioter who was killed by a Capitol police officer as she threatened the House chamber. That's only for Slate Plus members. So you also get discounts to live shows. You get no hitting the paywall on the Slate site, bonus episodes on other podcasts. So if you are a member, thank you. Enjoy it. If you're not a member, subscribe to Slate Plus directly from the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit slate.com/Gabfest Plus to get access wherever you listen. That's all for our show today. Our researcher is Emily Ditto. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is Senior Director for Podcast Operations. For Emily Bazelon and John Dickerson, I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.